So let's pick up on this question about what the sanctions we've seen imposed on Russia might mean for the world monetary order. Neil, you wrote a terrific piece for Bloomberg, I must say, addressing this question and the possibility that it may change the world order the way prior conflicts and disasters have affected world order. How do you see it this time?
Well, wars and plagues change the monetary system. It's not as if the monetary system is something that's the same over the centuries. When the war broke out 10 weeks ago, a number of theories did the rounds. Both of the major theories were wrong. Number one was, well, the Russians are going to get around sanctions using cryptocurrency. And the other theory was, wow, we've just done sanctions against the Russian central bank. Everybody's going to want to get out of dollars to be protected from future U.S. sanctions. Well, in fact, it turned out that there was really no way in any significant scale that the Russians could evade sanctions with cryptocurrency. Probably aid to Ukraine in the form of crypto mattered more. But even that's really quite trivial compared with the aid that the Ukrainians have got from the United States and its allies. As for the dollar, well, I hardly need to tell you, David, that it's actually been extraordinarily strengthened in the last 10 weeks, particularly against some currencies like the Japanese yen. But that doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the war. I mean, to some extent it does in the sense that in risk-off situations, people turn to the dollar. But I think more importantly, the Fed is tightening and not all other central banks are keeping up with it. So I think there were a couple of wrong theories. I think the really interesting question to ask is not so much, is the dollar one day going to be replaced by another fiat currency? I mean, that debate has been going on throughout my entire lifetime. It was happening in the late 1960s. And I think it's the wrong question. As long as there isn't a comparably large and liquid, attractive currency, at this point, the only potential contender would be the euro in terms of scale. But I don't really see that challenge as being a successful one. So the dollar is the dominant fiat currency in the existing monetary system. The question is, does technological change and the advent of new forms of electronic payment create an opportunity for alternative payment rails to the ones that are dominated by the dollar? I think that's an interesting question. And that brings us back to China, because it's China that's really been pioneering new forms of electronic payment, including, of course, its own central bank digital currency.
And Larry, I wonder if there's a connection between what Neil just said, the possibility of electronic payment systems, and something that we're hearing a lot of from countries other than the United States, which is a real concern not only with the general scope of the sanctions against Russia, but specifically denying Russia access to dollar reserves located abroad. We hear reports that China basically has summoned in their banks to say, how can we protect our reserves from that sort of thing? Could that have longer-ranging effects on the way we keep our reserves, the way we transfer our funds?
Let me start by trying a historical generalization on Neil. Countries don't lose their power because their currencies deteriorate as central. They lose the centrality of their currencies because they lose their power. And that's then the least, and the currency is then the least of their problems. If I take your native land and the British pound, the British didn't lose their centrality because of what happened to the pound. What happened to the pound because of their loss of centrality. And I think that's how it always is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. The critical thing with the pound was that there was an alternative that was better. Britain's decline was paralleled by the rise of the United States. And so once Britain was really overstretched, which was already true in the 1920s and 1930s, in imperial terms and in fiscal terms, there was this alternative that was new kid in town, the US dollar. Whereas today, although you can see the US is in some ways overstretched and has a fiscal problem, there isn't really an alternative that you could immediately see as preferable. And this is a point that you've made, I think, quite rightly in your famous line, you know, the dollar is number one. What are the alternatives when, let me get this right, Europe's a museum, Japan's an elderly care home, China's a jail, and Bitcoin's an experiment? One of your best lines, Larry.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you for that one. Neil, I'm glad you appreciated it. Look, I don't think we're going to see a shift totally away from real-world currency to metaverse currency anytime in the foreseeable future, because I think there's still going to need to be a bridge between the two, and that bridge is going to be the dollar.
Yep.
I also think that it's hard to imagine that in a world where money becomes less legally governed and more political, there's going to be increasing trust in Chinese money. And so for those reasons, I think you're going to see the dollar remain central until you have seen other big surprises that are actually more important to the future of the world than whatever it is that's happening to the dollar. So I think of the dollar as much more symptom and much less cause than I think a lot of the discussion would have it.
So point taken, Larry. It's basically the strength of the economy and the country involved more than anything else. But let's talk about the digital payment system that Niall talked about. Niall, specifically, it looks to me at least like central bank digital currencies are coming, whether it's China or whether it's Europe or whether it's the United States. When they come, does that increase the dominance of the dollar, take away from it, or is it just irrelevant, Niall?
Well, I think we have to be a bit careful here. The central bank digital currency, the ECNY, that the People's Bank of China rather hastily rolled out in 2020, 2021, is primarily designed to make sure that just about every transaction in China is under the direct surveillance of the Chinese Communist Party. I don't see why we would want to copy a system like that, and I don't think that we should. Rather, I think it would be preferable if the United States allowed all the innovation that's going on in decentralized finance, in what's sometimes called cryptocurrency, to happen here in the United States. It's clear that the internet needs some kind of native payment system. Typing in your credit card number on random websites is not the way to go. And I think we're evolving that payment system. But as Larry rightly said, it's not an alternative to the dollar. We're still going to be paying our taxes and I guess most of our wages and salaries in dollars. It's complementary to it. It's not either or. So I don't think the US should unhesitatingly copy and paste central bank digital currency, especially not on the Chinese model. I think the question for the central bank, for the Federal Reserve is how do we manage things so that all the innovation that's going on in decentralized finance is beneficial to the United States economy, contributes to economic growth, and doesn't destabilize the monetary system. And that's a very different question from should we have a central bank digital currency.